Dear professors, distinguished scholars, ladies and gentlemen, I will try to read what I have prepared, because if I will speak too much, it might, I might excess the time, so basically, I'm concerned not to be overly, not to excess, the time allotted to me, so have a short, time measure, next to me. It will be basically about one example of the meditation practice which we all very well know, and it's maybe by some people underestimated, but it's the most popular thing in China among the Catholics. But first, I would start with the biblical roots. Of course, meditation is kind of a complex topic in the Bible, because the word itself does not really appear. I mean, of course, in translations it does appear, but I'm sorry. In translation it does appear, the word meditation or meditating, but it has many different other connotations when you go to the root, to the original, basically to the Hebrew words, that are translated as such. So, in contemporary English, a verb to meditate is often associated with thinking about something, pondering something. Okay. We have the words. In this way, its meaning does not depart from its Latin etymological root. So, meditare, meditare, to reflect, to consider. There are also other meanings, of course. And they also denoted the process of reflection, the process of thinking. The connection of meditation with thinking is also reflected in the Bible, especially in the use of the Greek words like meletao or dianoeomai. So these are to think about, to practice, to consider. So meletao is also considered with practicing, actually. Nevertheless, a closer look at the terms denoting meditation in the Bible, as well as examples of this practice, reveal its other special features, and especially in Hebrew. In the Hebrew Bible, there are two prominent words which are used to express the idea of meditating. And the first one is Haggah. That's the upper one. Ponder, read, and undertone, speak. It appears, for instance, in Joshua 1:8 and Psalm 1:2, which encourage reflecting upon the law of God, or in Psalm 63, verse 7, where the author admits that he thinks about God during his night watch. The root of this word, however, is not primarily associated with thinking, but with, we can say, a sound emission of sound. Among its 28 occurrences as a verb in the Hebrew Bible, 14 times it has to be rendered into English as a verb associated with the emission of voice or sound. For example, depending on the context, as speak, tell, utter, proclaim, mutter, moan, or even groan. Thus, it is not surprising that also in verses where Haggah is generally translated as to meditate, its meaning is nevertheless associated primarily with a sound. Holiday, in his dictionary, explains it as, I'm quoting, reading in an undertone, or pondering by talking to oneself. So here we have the example from the Joshua 1:8. There is the word Haggah that is indicated in red, and the translations, the Net Bible translated as you must memorize it. You must memorize it. The New Jerusalem Bible, you meditate on it day and night. And there is another, there is a note actually in the Net Bible that you must memorize it, but word for word it means you must read it in undertones, or you must recite it quietly. That was the way that the law of God should be meditated on. You started with reading it, with pronouncing it. The second word used to denote meditating is siyach. Its meaning is also connected with the voice emission, and in a number of occurrences it is rendered as tell, speak, complain, or even sing. This root, in its verbal form, is used in the Hebrew Bible more often, 11 times, than Haggah, 5 times, to express the idea of meditating as a prayer. So that's the Siach, the first one in the blue, it's Haggah, of course in another grammatical form. The one in the red is Siach, another grammatical form, and according to translations, they are used as synonyms. Here we have an example when these two words are actually used as synonyms, and they are translated like reflect, ponder, or in New Revised Standard Version, I will meditate, I will muse. Muse is connected with talking as well. Or I will recount, and I will speak. This is interesting, the translation, the Jewish translation, Tanakh translation, is the Jewish, JPS it's called, in the abbreviation, Jewish Publishing Society. So they emphasized speaking. So I recount of your works, I speak of your acts. The use of words associated with sound emission to express the notion of a mental process appears to be no coincidence. It simply underlines the fact that in antiquity, pondering something not infrequently began from saying or reading words aloud or muttering, whispering them in a low voice. The frequent repetition of a phrase or two containing the revealed truth enabled an individual to commit such words to his long-term memory. This fact in turn created an opportunity for him to think about their meaning more often and thereby influence his decision-making process. Repetition of short phrases in prayer is well attested in the Bible. A number of psalms whose composition must have had a strong connection with the mental prayer contain regular repetitions in the form of a refrain occurring every couple of verses or even a repeated phrase in every single verse. As the famous example of the latter, Psalm 136 can be quoted. Each of its 26 verses ends with a phrase, Ki le'olam hasdo, which praises God for His great mercy or His great steadfast love, depending on the translation that we use. Apart from the book of Psalms, there are also other examples of the repetitive prayer in the Bible. In Daniel 3:57 to 88, this is it's in the Catholic and Orthodox Bible. The Protestants don't have it because it's in Greek. Deuterocanonical part. So that's the famous canticle of the three young men, often recited in the breviary, is built on the repeated expression eulogeteton Kyrio, bless the Lord. Also, it is worth noting that in the Garden of Gethsemane, Jesus himself prayed by, as Mark records, by saying the same words, ton auton logon eipon. He was saying again, palin, again, he was saying the same words. Jesus' practice of the repetitive prayer. Last but not least, one more crucial feature of biblical meditation needs to be mentioned. As a prayer, meditation was always directed to God. It was a way of having a relationship with God. In the Old Testament, this focus on God was often expressed by pondering on what God revealed, which was labeled in different ways as God's law, precepts, statutes, wonders, word, etc. For example, Psalm 119 or Psalm 1, which together with Psalm 2, as Limbook writes, provide an introduction to the Psalter as a whole. Of course, it is true that the words denoting the process of meditation were sometimes used to express the idea of merely thinking about something, or planning, plotting, etc. But meditating is never portrayed in the Bible as a fitness exercise or a self-centered spiritual practice. To sum up, meditation. Prayerful meditation in the Bible appears as a mental process which not infrequently began with reading, pronouncing the pious words aloud in a repetitive manner with a simultaneous focus on God and what pertains to Him. So we can say it had an oral component, a repetitive component, and focus on God and His works. Now let us see, we can say, in the history of the church, of course there are many more examples, but the prayers that go according to this pattern, the following ones, there are more than them, but these are very famous ones. They can be named different practices of Lectio Divina, as a meditative reading of the scripture, Jesus' prayer, which is more in the Orthodox Church, and the practice of the Rosary. And this is, I would like to use as an example. Let us now see how this biblical heritage was present among the faithful in the history of the Catholic Church in China, just very shortly, with some short examples. No attempt is made to prove that some religious practices of the Chinese faithful were direct results of their listening to biblical teachings and applying them. Nevertheless, it is not difficult to see similarities between these practices and the roots of meditation in the Bible, which has just been shortly explained. When we ask which prayer, widespread in China, combined the elements of speaking, repeating, and reflecting upon matters pertaining to God, it is the Rosary that comes first to mind. As it is stated, I think it's the last volume of the Chinese Face of Jesus Christ, the volume edited by Roman Malek. There have been, it's written there, like a kind of a summary. There have been in China, I'm quoting, countless texts on the Rosary, and the method of its prayer, always including introductions to the mysteries, this means to the life of Jesus. Now, of course, the popularity of the Rosary in China can hardly be seen as a result of the reflection of the people on the biblical meditation practices. The reasons for this phenomenon were manifold, and I could say, at least these ones could be mentioned. From the point of view of many missionaries, teaching people to pray the Rosary, well, of course, Dominicans were very prominent in this respect. It's their special prayer, but also other missionaries did that. Teaching people to pray the Rosary was one of the best ways to bring Jesus Christ and the mysteries of his life closer to the people. From the point of view of the ordinary faithful, the outward appearances of praying the Rosary bore similarities to the Buddhist practices they were familiar with. For example, repetitive recitation, or rather chanting in semitone. This practice, I think, it could still be observed, at least in Taiwan, not when people pray Rosary using Mandarin, but when they use Taiwanese, this Hokkien language, they chant. Actually, this is what I heard. It's like kind of a chanting. So it's probably something similar that was observed already by the missionaries a couple of hundreds years ago in the mainland China. A kind of a practice that had similarities with the Buddhist practices, but of course, with a totally different content. Chanting in semitone of a given text, or the use of chaplets or strings of beads. That was another similarity. Buddhists had it, the Catholics had it as well. So it was a familiar concept already, and for people it was easy to accept. All these similarities, however, do not nullify the biblical roots of the Rosary, even if the Chinese faithful practicing this form of prayer were not necessarily aware of them. These roots are the most visible not only in the form of this prayer, but as at least all Catholics know, first of all in its contents. Most words used in repeated invocations during the prayer of the Rosary are taken directly from the biblical text. The Lord's Prayer is from the Gospel according to Matthew, the first half of the Hail Mary from the Gospel according to Luke, whose feast we celebrate today, whereas other invocations or parts of them have been coined on the basis of the biblical message. Most importantly, however, it is the meditation on the mysteries of the life of Jesus which show us deep biblical roots of the Rosary. The missionaries were aware of the importance of this meditation, but also of the difficulty of combining oral and mental prayer. And some of them took steps to teach the faithful to pay attention to this issue. An example of Father Jean-Martin Mois, an MEP priest, who worked between the years of 1730 he lived in the years 1730 to 1793, and he worked in East Sichuan and Guizhou. He wrote special meditations to be said during the rosary between each Hail Mary prayer. He intended to help the faithful not to recite the prayers kind of mechanically, automatically, but to direct their thoughts to the mysteries and learn to imitate the examples from them. Teaching the faithful this type of meditative prayer was without a doubt very fruitful for the growth of the church in China. It helped people to preserve their faith, especially in times of persecutions. Father Charbonnier, in his book about the history of the church in China, relates his personal experience that in 1983, during his ministry in Singapore, he was visited by a 23-year-old sailor from Fuzhou in Fujian province, China, who wanted to see a priest. It turned out that he was a Catholic, from the Catholic family, but he did not know much about his faith. His growing up in the turbulent times of the Cultural Revolution was no doubt one of the leading causes for this lack of knowledge. What he knew, however, was the Rosary, that he was praying in his own local language, the Fuzhou language, with his family members at home every night. The Rosary was basically his whole Catholicism, but it was there. Nevertheless, the Rosary was not only the prayer of the beginners in faith. It was also practiced by the faithful whose very advanced level of spiritual life was proved by the martyrdom. And one instance of this we have in the account of the martyrs published in the year 2000 in Taiwan. It's about Wu Guosheng, who on 7th of November 1814 in Sichuan was condemned to death for refusing to renounce his faith. He was one of the 120 martyrs canonized later by Pope John Paul II in October 2000. And it was the Rosary he chose to pray publicly when he was being led to the place of execution. Now, in conclusion, it can be stated what follows. In the Bible, meditation as a prayer is often associated not only with the process of thinking about God and His Word, but also simultaneously with a repetitive oral prayer. This trace of religious practice could be found in a number of devotional activities of Christians around the world. The Rosary is one of the prominent examples of this tradition. The combination of oral and mental elements produced this prayer, which became so extremely popular in China. It was both simple and very profound, rooted in the Bible and adapted to the local forms of expression, appreciated and practiced by both fresh converts to Catholicism and by the heroic believers who gave their lives for the faith. It can be a reminder that the simplicity of repeating specific fixed phrases in prayer has a long tradition in the Bible and the history of the Church, and when done properly, it can become a profound meditative encounter with God. Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you. You can stay here. We can take some question about this interesting talk about going from the Bible and to the example of how to use the prayers in China. So yes.
Yes, thank you very much. Just a small remark about chanting. This is common in several countries. You know, Vietnam, they cannot pray without chanting. Yeah. I remember when our novices went to Thailand, and the novice master scolded them. They said, "You shouldn't chant all the time. That's not good." So they were at loss because then they don't know the prayers if they don't chant. You know, it goes to the heart.
Yes, yes.
And Laos also is chanting.
Yes, yes, indeed. Yeah. And, here, what I found particular about that is basically that, well, I haven't heard, the Rosary said, in Taiwanese. It was not if it was Taiwanese, it was always chanted, you know. But maybe I haven't had this opportunity to meet, you know. In the Rosary, you know, in this Legion of Mary groups in Taiwan, you know, all you know, in different parishes, when they use Mandarin, they recite. Like we, you know, they don't chant anymore, you know. But with Taiwanese, it's chanted, you know. So or maybe not everywhere, you know, I cannot say, you know. But I think it preserves something of this kind of semitone chanting from the ancient times already, you know, that it's still being practiced in some communities. So it's a kind of peculiar thing, you know, because we also sometimes chant, you know, Rosary in Poland, for example, but it's, yeah, it does not have connection with another religion, you know, it's simply, you know, to make it more solemn, maybe, yeah. Thank you.
I'm not at all an expert on these questions, but what recalls to my mind is that in several traditions you have this kind of repetition through Taoist rituals or Vedas and songs, and I don't understand what they say, Indian as well. So there is not something more general, common,
Yes.
relation between people of God, well, this way of communication, getting facts, information, something like this.
You mean, well, the outward appearances, of course, it's based in the human nature, I would say, you know, because, you know, you want to memorize something, you repeat it, you know, many times, and, you know, kind of chanting, and of course, but here the similarities are even stronger, you know, because, you know, the use of beads, I would say, it's not peculiar to China, it's also in other countries, you know, because, you know, the Buddhists are using the beads. The Muslims are using the beads as well, you know. I mean, the chain of beads, you know, for their own prayer, you know. In the Orthodox Church, you know, it's used for the Jesus prayer. It can be used as well. It's similar to the Muslim string of beads, you know, at least in the Middle East. So I think, you know, it makes for the people easier to kind of, you know, for the new converts especially, you know, they know it, you know, from the background, you know, and this semitone chanting was something peculiar, you know. It was not a regular chanting, it was a kind of a thing that they knew already, you know. So it made them easier to get into the Christian practice, into the Catholic faith, you know, because they were familiar with the practices, with the outward appearances, we can say. It's a different content, of course, you know, but you know, something that they did, you know, they saw it, you know, already somewhere else. So it was kind of inculturated, we can say. It was an easier process. And at the same time, I just wanted to show that in the Bible, in the Old Testament, it was like this, you know. It was also, you know, repetitive prayer. It was also a combination of saying the words of oral prayer with the process of thinking, or the process of wandering upon the Word of God. You know, it's much broader than thinking. You know, it's kind of, and it should lead to the kind of contemplative meditation. You know, when one simply wants to be with God. You know, does not need to be discursive. You know, it can be simply a process of, I mean, the situation of amazement, we can say.
Yes, perhaps I could say, I think that perhaps the function of the language, which is quite mystical, that you pronounce words, but without paying attention to what the words say, that somehow you enter into this kind, I mean, I think it's the Orthodox tradition, where the philocally, where you repeat the words, but you detach from the meaning, and somehow, I think there's something like magical somehow, but you hope that the words you are saying, I go often to the Buddhist monasteries, and at the beginning, when we recite the sutra, we are very slow. So mi, to, fo, and we start very, very slow, and little by little, reciting very, very quickly. And so we don't, I mean, all the monks have memorized the sutra, but they don't, their mind are not attached to the words. They completely somehow into that flow of language, and there is an element of mystical or perhaps even magical function. I don't know.
Yeah, I think the difference lies in here, actually, you know, because according to my understanding, you know, it was about focusing on God, you know, maybe not the words that you are pronouncing, you know, exactly, but then you focus on God and on something else, you know. So you focus on the mysteries of God and on God Himself. So in Buddhism, if I understand it correctly, you know, it's more about detachment. So really, you know, it's not focusing on words and not focusing on anything, basically.
Yeah.
Making, you know, the empty space, emptiness. Whereas the biblical meditation, you know, it's a relationship with God. It's not about emptiness. It's about God, you know, and whatever, you know, is connected with God. So I see a big difference here, you know. But from the outward appearances, it might appear, you know, really the same, you know. But I see the difference.
Okay, thank you very much for the Rybka.